There would be meat stored in great piles and rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it, and thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hand over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dry dung of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then rats, bread, and meat would go into the hoppers together. All of their sausage came out of the same bowl, but when they came to wrap it, they would stamp some of it special, and for this they would charge 2 cents more a pound. Upton Sinclair, The Jungle. These kinds of contaminated conditions sound like a thing of the past. When The Jungle attracted shocked publicity in 1906, the Meat Inspection Act was created to help. The Pure Food and Drug Act of the same year established the Food and Drug Administration to also increase consumer protection. These two examples took place during the presidency of Theodore Roosevelt, a progressive president. The impact of the progressive movement is reflected in our laws today. Laws like Minnesota Statute 31.161 about food safety explicitly state that food cannot be handled or sold in a filthy, unclean, or insanitary condition. Mislabeling of products has also been deemed illegal according to Minnesota Statute 34A.11, which says misbranded food can warrant withdrawal from distribution. But how often are these rules enforced? To what extent were the progressive reforms successful in improving food safety? A recent issue has surfaced with food labeling in the UK. Apparently, some beef has been contaminated by, and in some cases replaced completely with horse meat. Packages were being deliberately mislabeled. Though it does not pose as a public health threat, it begs the question, what else is going into our food? To get a better idea of the background to this question, I interviewed Jolynn K. Gardner, an expert in health and nutrition at the University of St. Thomas. She told me that most of the safety concerns related to food actually arise from improperly preparing and handling food in the home, especially raw meat. In general, the food supplied to the public is usually very safe. However, as the production of food becomes more commercialized, there is an increase in the risk of contamination. For example, the ground beef in a single fast food hamburger can contain the meat from dozens to hundreds of cows. For each cow introduced to the mixture, the chances of contamination increases. The less a food has been processed, the less chance it has to be contaminated from other meat, machinery, workers, etc. Despite the notorious violations of the meatpacking industry, other aspects of the food safety in the progressive era were safer, simply because people were more likely to get food from smaller local producers. For example, here is a photo of my great-great-grandfather's grocery store circa 1900. All of the food was either grown by him or the local farmers. In comparison, grocery stores today are more likely to carry products from large commercialized companies. In addition, according to Professor Gardner, much of our produce, especially this time of year, comes from other countries. Many countries do not have strict pesticide regulations like the US does. Therefore, produce that originates in other countries may have been treated with pesticides that are actually banned in the US. Since some of these factors are out of our control, it comes down to proper food preparation in the home. However, in some cases, the handling of the food is never in your control. For example, buying food from a concession stand does not allow you to have any influence over how the food is made. Paula Kennedy runs a concession stand business and told me some information about food safety in that area. All of her food equipment must be certified by the National Sanitation Foundation. This involves safety steps such as making sure that the temperature of stored food remains constant and that all food packages must be raised off the ground on tables or pallets at all times. The food tent must also have a sealed, painted plywood floor when setting up on earthy surfaces. Her tent is inspected at virtually every show. Temperatures are taken and a thorough review of equipment and supplies is done. From her experience, most inspectors are helpful and enjoy educating workers on improving conditions. So far, we have seen that food handling at the local level seems to be operating with a fairly decent level of sanitary conditions today. That is similar to the case in the progressive era. But how have progressive reforms affected large-scale operations like the one written about in The Jungle? Recent controversy has arisen around a filler additive that is commonly called pink slime. It is used by large companies such as Tyson and Cargill because it is a cheap way to use leftover fat scraps. About 70% of ground beef will contain some pink slime, sometimes making up as much as 25% of the product. Because it is technically made from beef, companies are not required to label it. This sounds suspiciously like the days before the progressive era, where random substances were mixed together without distinction in the labels. There is also controversy over the potential health risks. These trimmings are taken from just below the skin, which heavily increases the risk of contamination from fecal matter of dirty animals. However, heating and chemical treatment deem this additive safe for human consumption by the USDA. This does not even begin to cover inhumane animal treatment that can, in turn, affect the meat produced from them. Bacteria and viruses can easily spread where animals are crowded past capacity. In addition, the meat industry today is also lagging behind in worker treatment. Repetitive motions cause physical problems, and in general, the poor conditions can lead to sloppy performance in preparing food. One Nebraska beef meatpacking line worker said, "The line is so fast there is no time to sharpen the knife. The knife gets dull and you have to cut harder. That's when it really starts to hurt, and that's when you cut yourself." There have been reports of some managers of assembly line productions refusing to stop the line for sanitation issues. All in all, poor worker conditions lead to poorer food quality. To avoid some of these problems, people can buy meat directly from the farmers, such as at a farmer's market. For example, my family buys a quarter side of beef every year from an organic farmer. We know that no hormones or antibiotics are used, and all of the meat comes from the same steer. It also ends up being cheaper than in the average grocery store. A straight comparison of the processing of meat in the Progressive Era compared to today would show cleaner facilities with regulations improving sanitation and the general quality of the meat. But, compared with other advances of our time, the situation should probably have improved more than it has. Controversies about what is actually going into our food shouldn't be an issue. However, it is a reality that we face today. Part of this may simply be from the fact that food is becoming increasingly more commercialized and industrial over time. As far as local foods, regulations that were started during the Progressive Era have made this the safest option for consuming food. Still today, a lot of food safety comes down to how we handle food in our homes. Increased awareness since before the Progressive Era has helped decrease this issue as well. In conclusion, the Progressive Era has led to improved food safety. Then and now, local foods tend to be the safest option as long as they're handled properly in the home. Large-scale operations back then were notorious for rampant health issues. The changes that reformers pushed for back then have at least taken away the worst of these offenses. However, there are still controversies over food safety, though they may be less offensive than the rats in their dung going into the food supply as described in The Jungle.